Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's Intelligence Insights briefing from At Risk International's Global Risk Intelligence team. I'm Ross Hill, Director of Intelligence, and I'll start you off today with our update on Ukraine. There's two key developments in the Ukraine war. First, Russia has begun its plans to mobilize around 300,000 men, part of its largest conscription since World War II. This has resulted in some protests domestically in Russia and a bit of a rush with some men of fighting age wanting to leave the country. The cost of one-way flights to visa-free countries increased substantially, and how to leave Russia became the most searched term on Google. As a result of that, Russia's actually relaxed some of the conditions to allow for more exemptions for certain workers, particularly in the services sector. I think Russia had lost a lot of people from that sector throughout the war and is keen to kind of stop those people leaving the country. Although it's a substantial conscription, that influx of troops will likely take several months to have an impact. They have been promised some extra training, although Russian training is fairly limited, and many of the experienced officers that actually could deliver that training have probably been killed already in the war. So actually what we might end up with is an increase in poorly trained and poorly equipped troops sent to Ukraine with no real motivation to fight. And then the death of conscripts would actually be quite damaging domestically for Putin in Russia. The second main development is Russia holding referendums in parts of Ukraine where it holds territory. They're obviously staged and will not be recognized internationally. But Russia basically annexing those areas means that it will consider Ukrainian attacks on that territory as attacks against Russia. And that gives it kind of a few different options, really. It can then call it a war, although everyone considers it a war. Russia's been calling it that special military operation. But by sort of changing that narrative, it would potentially allow for a wider conscription plan if they wanted to do that. But it also maybe allows Russia to increasingly target civilian infrastructure in Ukraine. And then kind of in an extreme scenario, it could even be used as a justification for the use of nuclear weapons. Vladimir Putin actually made some comments in a televised address last week saying that Russia was not bluffing on its potential use of weapons of mass destruction. However, it's kind of maybe not necessarily just around like a specific escalation. There was a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization last week or the week before with China, India, and Turkey essentially telling Vladimir Putin he needed to end the war as soon as possible. And Putin was actually forced to make some conciliatory statements at that meeting. So for that sort of reason, it's possible that the intent to make those areas of Ukraine Russian territory is to kind of create the conditions for escalation and hope that they don't occur. So maybe, kind of trying to force Ukraine to stop its counteroffensives and stop actually attacking that territory and allow some room maybe for kind of a ceasefire or some sort of kind of frozen conflict to take place. And we did have the unexpected prisoner exchange between Russia and Ukraine last week, which is a minor positive thing. But we haven't actually seen anything around a ceasefire. Ukraine's still carrying out offensives. And at the moment, we actually don't see anything other than an ongoing and kind of prolonged conflict. For our next update on the protests in Iran, 10 days of consecutive protests taking place nationwide. It's the largest protest since 2009. More than 50 people, including protesters and the security forces, reportedly died so far. They actually started over the death and custody of a woman that had been arrested by the morality police. There are claims that she was beaten by police officers, although the authorities saying she died of heart failure. But those protests, which started around that single issue, have now developed into protests calling for regime change. Within mass civil unrest, that's typically an indicator of escalation and momentum in protests. There's many reasons for the protests in Iran, in response to what's essentially been a crackdown by President Ibrahim Raisi against women in the country, but also kind of some systemic issues such as corruption and economic mismanagement. But we're probably likely to see a fairly harsh crackdown by the security forces. Iran has, over the past few years, seen off regular bouts of unrest in that way. So we're just monitoring what the escalation looks like there. I think it would take quite a lot for security forces to be overwhelmed enough to actually threaten the regime. And now I'm going to hand you over to one of our analysts, Roman Fisher, who's going to take you through our final article for the week.
Thank you, Ross. As we're all aware by now, in June, the Supreme Court reversed its ruling on Roe v. Wade, eliminating the constitutional right to abortion, and therefore leaving it to state legislatures to decide the practice. The Supreme Court decision triggered numerous protests across the nation. Although several states have since banned abortion or restricted its practice, state governments continue to debate on how they will proceed on the matter. On Saturday, Arizona became the 14th state to enact a nearly complete ban on abortion. This occurred the day after Judge Julie Johnson of Pima County's Superior Court released a ruling that allowed the enforcement of a decades-old ban. Shortly after the ruling in Pima County, protests kicked off outside the court. Elsewhere, abortion-related protests have recently occurred in Wisconsin, West Virginia, Louisiana, New York, and of course in Washington, D.C. This issue continues to spark demonstrations and clashes between opposing groups, even in states where plans to abandon abortion don't exist. Last month, a clash between groups broke out at a Planned Parenthood clinic in Modesto, California. California being one of those states that has no plans at all to restrict the practice. The protest was cleared by law enforcement, wearing tactical riot gear and using pepper ball guns. It's important for organizations and individuals, especially those with interest near state capitals and state superior courts, to understand the potential impacts associated with protests caused by the issue. Protests large enough in scale can cause serious disruptions to normal business operations, disruptions that can be mitigated with foresight and planning. And that is what we have for you this week. We do appreciate you spending a little bit of time. We hope you found the information valuable, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.